June 6, 1944. Normandy beaches erupted in chaos as Allied forces stormed Fortress Europe. Among the landing craft, Canadian infantry clutched an unusual weapon that German intelligence had dismissed as primitive. Within hours, panzer commanders radioed desperate reports. Their Tiger tanks, previously invincible, were burning. The Americans had bazookas. The British had launchers. But the Canadians had something different, something brutal. The PIAT wasn't just another anti-tank weapon. It was a close-range killer that turned every hedgerow into a death trap for German armor. So for 30 hours, June 6, 1944, HMS Hillary, English Channel. Lieutenant James Mackenzie pressed his palm against the cold steel bulkhead as the landing craft pitched violently. Around him, 42 men from the Regina Rifle Regiment sat in darkness, each absorbed in private ritual. Some prayed, others checked equipment for the 100th time. Mackenzie's fingers traced the ungainly silhouette of the weapon resting against his knee. The projector, infantry, anti-tank, the PIAT. He remembered the first time he'd seen it, 8 months earlier, at a training depot outside Portsmouth. The instructor, a gruff sergeant from Yorkshire, had dropped the weapon onto a wooden table with a metallic thud that made the entire room wince. 39 pounds of spring-loaded steel, looking more like a medieval siege engine than modern military hardware. No rocket propulsion, no smooth trigger mechanism. Just a massive spring that had to be compressed with the full weight of a man's body, then released to hurl a 3-pound bomb through armor plate. "Gentlemen," the sergeant had announced, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "this is what happens when engineers have a budget of precisely nothing and a mandate to build something that won't kill the operator." Probably. The room had erupted in nervous laughter. The Americans had their M1 Bazooka, sleek, tube-launched, rocket-propelled, effective to 300 yards. The Germans had their Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck, both devastating at range. The PIAT? Maximum effective range, 100 yards. Optimal killing distance, 50 yards or less. To destroy a tank, you had to be close enough to see the terror in the driver's vision slit. Mackenzie had watched demonstration after demonstration. The weapon kicked like an angry mule. The spring mechanism jammed in mud. In cold weather, it seized completely. In hot weather, premature detonations were common. Loading required the operator to lie on his back, place both feet on the weapon's shoulder rest, and cock the spring using his entire body weight, a process that left you vulnerable for precious seconds in combat. "Why the hell are we using this thing?" a corporal had asked during training. The instructor's expression had turned deadly serious. "Because when it works, it punches through armor like God's own hammer. Because it doesn't produce backblast that gives away your position. Because when Jerry's Tiger tank is 30 yards away and closing, this ugly bastard will save your life." Statistical analysis from British ordnance had been equally sobering. The PIAT's shaped charge warhead could penetrate 100 millimeters of armor at point-blank range, enough to kill any German tank from the side or rear. But penetration wasn't the whole story. The weapon's unique spring propulsion system created specific tactical advantages that military theorists were only beginning to understand. First, silence. The PIAT made a distinctive thump when fired, but nothing like the rocket's roar from a bazooka. In the hedgerow country of Normandy, where visibility was measured in yards and ambush was constant, acoustic signature meant everything. A bazooka team fired once and immediately relocated because every German within 400 yards knew their exact position. A PIAT team could fire, remain concealed, and fire again. Second, environment. The bazooka's rocket motor required clear backblast area, 30 feet of empty space behind the operator. In buildings, trenches, or dense vegetation, this was often impossible. The PIAT could be fired from enclosed spaces, from prone positions in ditches, from second-story windows. Tactical flexibility in urban combat was proving invaluable. Third, reliability in context. Yes, the PIAT jammed in mud, but it didn't jam because moisture contaminated rocket propellant. It didn't fail because electrical firing systems shorted out. Its mechanical simplicity meant that when it did malfunction, a competent soldier could fix it in the field with nothing but a wrench and determination. But German intelligence had missed something crucial in their assessment of Allied anti-tank capabilities. Wehrmacht tactical analysis, captured later in war, revealed that German commanders had categorized the PIAT as secondary threat, short range, mechanically unreliable, minimal tactical impact. Their doctrine assumed tank warfare would occur at medium ranges, where their superior optics, gun stabilization, and armor thickness would dominate. They built tactics around the assumption that Allied infantry would engage from 200-300 yards, Bazooka range. They never anticipated that Canadian infantry would close to 50 yards. The landing craft's engine pitch changed. Mackenzie felt the deck shudder as the craft approached the beach. Around him, men struggled to stand, weighted down by equipment. Each rifle section carried 1 PIAT, 2 operators, and 8 bombs. Total weight: 103 pounds distributed between 2 men, plus their personal weapons and ammunition. They'd practiced the drill hundreds of times. First man carried the launcher and 4 bombs. Second man carried 4 bombs and provided security. 30 seconds! The coxswain shouted above the engine roar. Mackenzie gripped the PIAT tighter. Through the steel hull, he could hear the distinctive crack of German 88mm guns, the stutter of MG-42 machine guns, the chaos of invasion. In his pocket, he carried a letter from his wife in Regina, Saskatchewan. In his hands, he carried 39 pounds of engineering desperation that German tank commanders had dismissed as obsolete. The ramp dropped. Light flooded in. Men surged forward into water, into fire, into history. The PIAT was going to war. 1245 hours, June 7th, 1944. Orthy, Normandy. The hedgerows of Normandy were older than Canada itself. Ancient farming boundaries, 8 feet tall, made of earth and stone and vegetation so dense that visibility ended at 30 feet. Each field was a separate universe. Each lane was a potential ambush. Every shadow could conceal a panzer. Sergeant Thomas Chen crouched in a drainage ditch, water seeping through his uniform, and tried to control his breathing. 20 yards ahead, through a gap in the hedgerow, he could see the massive silhouette of a Panzer IV. The tank was positioned hull down behind an earthen berm, its 75mm gun traversing slowly, searching for targets. Behind Chen, Private Robert MacDonald lay on his back in the mud, boots planted on the PIAT's shoulder rest, compressing the spring with trembling legs. The weapon's cocking mechanism required 200 pounds of force. MacDonald weighed 165 pounds. He was using muscles he didn't know he had, face purple with exertion, tendons standing out on his neck like cables. "Come on," Chen whispered. "Come on." The spring locked with a metallic click that sounded deafening. MacDonald rolled over, gasping, and handed the weapon to Chen. His hands were shaking. They'd been in combat for 31 hours without sleep. The battalion had taken 40% casualties crossing the beach. Of the 12 PIAT teams that had landed, only 4 were still operational. Chen loaded a bomb into the trough. The shaped charge warhead was painted green, stenciled with cryptic ordnance markings. Inside that steel casing was 1.5 pounds of explosive, designed to form a molten jet capable of penetrating armor plate. But only if the angle was right. Only if the range was correct. Only if Chen didn't flinch when the Panzer's machine gun inevitably found him. "Range?" MacDonald asked. Chen estimated 40 yards, maybe 45. The tactical manual recommended engagement at 100 yards or less. Optimal range was 50 yards. At 40 yards, they were inside the margin where German return fire became personal. Chen could see the commander's hatch on the Panzer, could make out the ventilation grills, could identify the specific model by the configuration of road wheels. This was Panzer IV AUSFNH, upgraded with additional frontal armor. The Americans had learned the hard way that frontal assault was suicide. but the Panzer's side armor was only 30 mm thick, vulnerable. If Chen could maneuver to the tank's flank, if he could achieve perpendicular impact, the PIAT's shaped charge would punch through and detonate inside the crew compartment. The tank began moving forward, engine growling. Black smoke belched from its exhaust. Somewhere to their right, a British 6-pounder anti-tank gun fired, the distinctive crack of high-velocity round. The Panzer's turret swiveled toward the new threat, gun elevating. "Now," MacDonald said, "while it's distracted." Chen burst from the ditch, sprinting through mud, weapon heavy on his shoulder. 25 years old, engineering student from Vancouver before the war, now running towards 60 tons of German steel with a spring-loaded anti-tank weapon. The absurdity would have been funny if he weren't so terrified. The Panzer's commander saw him. Chen watched the man's face change. Surprise, then alarm, then frantic movement as he reached for his machine gun. The MG-34 mounted on the cupola traversed, barrel swinging toward Chen. 30 yards, Chen dropped to one knee, shouldered the PIAT, aligned the crude open sights. The tank filled his vision. He could see weld seams, could read the German tactical markings stenciled on the turret, could smell the diesel exhaust, mixing with cordite and mud. The machine gun fired. Tracers snapped past his head. Green fireflies in peripheral vision. One round struck the ground inches from his boot, throwing mud across his face, 25 yards. "Shoot!" MacDonald screamed from somewhere behind him. Chen squeezed the trigger. The weapon bucked viciously against his shoulder, the massive spring releasing with a sound like a sledgehammer striking steel. The bomb left the trough, wobbling slightly, then stabilized in flight. 3.2 seconds from trigger pull to impact, an eternity compressed into heartbeats. The shaped charge struck the Panzer's side armor at the joint between hull and turret, exactly perpendicular. The copper liner of the warhead collapsed inward at 25,000 feet per second, forming a jet of molten metal that burned through armor plate like a cutting torch, through butter. The jet penetrated the crew compartment, ignited ammunition stored in racks along the hull interior, and created an overpressure wave that killed instantly. The Panzer didn't explode dramatically like in the movies. It simply stopped. Smoke began pouring from every opening, hatches, vision slits, gun barrel. A moment later, flames appeared. Then the crew started bailing out. 2 men, then a third, uniforms smoldering, faces blackened. Chen reloaded. His hands moved automatically through the drill. Remove spent cartridge, insert new bomb, verify alignment, prepare to recock spring. Around him, the battlefield continued its symphony of violence. More German tanks were arriving. Intelligence had warned about the 12th SS Panzer Division's counterattack. But something had changed. Chen could feel it in the air, could see it in how the German tanks were maneuvering. They were hanging back, keeping distance, refusing to close. Tank commanders had learned from experience that in the hedgerows, Canadian infantry with PIATs were deadlier than anti-tank guns. You could spot an anti-tank gun from the gun's profile, from muzzle flash, from the dust it kicked up. But PIAT teams were invisible until they fired, and by then you were already burning. Over the next 48 hours, Chen's section would engage 6 more German armored vehicles. They would kill 4, 2 Panzer I-4s, 1 Stu-G3 assault gun, 1 half-track. They would miss twice, once due to mechanical failure, once because the target moved at the critical moment. Their success rate, 66. 7% was actually above average for PIAT teams in Normandy combat, but statistics didn't capture reality. MacDonald had been wounded by shrapnel on their 3rd engagement. His replacement, a 19-year-old kid from Ontario, had been killed by a sniper during their 5th engagement. The PIAT itself had nearly been lost when they'd been forced to abandon position during a German mortar barrage. The weapon that German intelligence had dismissed as secondary threat was systematically destroying the panzer units that were supposed to throw the Allies back into the sea. June 11th, 1944, 02:30 hours. German defensive position, KPK. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter pressed his eye against the commander's periscope and felt sweat trickling down his spine despite the cool night air. 4 days ago, he'd commanded a platoon of 5 Panzer V's. Now he had 2 operational tanks, 3 dead crew members, and orders to hold this crossroads against Canadian infantry who seemed to materialize from shadows. The Tiger tank he'd requested as reinforcement sat 30 meters to his left, 56 tons of armor, 88mm gun, capable of destroying any Allied tank at 2,000 meters. On paper, unstoppable. In reality, Richter had watched 2 Tigers burn in the last 72 hours, both victims of close-range ambush by weapons that made almost no sound. "Herr Oberleutnant," his gunner whispered through the intercom. "Movement 2 o'clock, 40 meters. Richter swiveled the periscope. Nothing. Just hedgerows and darkness, and the burning wreckage of a half-track that had detonated a mine that afternoon. British tactics, he understood. American tactics he'd studied at the academy. But these Canadians fought differently, patient, methodical, willing to wait hours for perfect position. The tactical briefing from division headquarters had been almost comical in its inadequacy. Exercise caution against enemy anti-tank teams. Maintain standoff distance of 150 meters minimum. Avoid close quarters engagement. As if maintaining distance was possible when every field was enclosed by impenetrable hedgerows, when roads were cratered by bombardment, when visibility ended at 50 meters. Richter had commanded tanks in North Africa, had fought British armor at Tobruk. That was warfare, he understood. Open desert, long-range duels where superior German optics and gun quality dominated. Here, all his advantages were negated. His tank's 75mm gun could kill at 2,500 meters, but he couldn't see past the next hedgerow. His frontal armor was proof against most Allied anti-tank weapons, but these damned Canadian infantry kept hitting from the flanks, from above, from positions he never saw until it was too late. The morning briefing from regimental intelligence had included captured photographs of the weapon. The analyst, a nervous captain from Berlin, had displayed images of what looked like a crude metal tube with spring mechanism. The British call it PIAT, Projector Infantry Anti-Tank. Our assessment indicates limited tactical value. Short range, mechanical unreliability inferior to American Bazooka. But Richter had seen the weapon's effects. He'd pulled Wolfgang from a burning Panzer IV after a PIAT strike, burns covering 40% of his body, mumbling about no warning, no rocket trail, just impact. He'd interviewed survivors from Hauptmann Meyer's company, 3 tank crews who'd abandoned vehicles after single hits. The psychological impact was devastating. Rocket weapons you could hear coming. That distinctive whoosh gave you half a second to react. The PIAT made a dull thump, and by the time you processed the sound, the shaped charge was already burning through your armor. Wehrmacht doctrine had evolved around medium-range engagements because German engineering philosophy emphasized standoff capability. The Panther tank could kill from 2,000 meters. The Tiger's 88mm gun was accurate to 2,500 meters. German tactical training taught commanders to use superior range and armor to dominate the battlefield. But in Normandy, tactical doctrine collided with physical reality. You couldn't fight at 2,000 meters when visibility was 50 meters. Superior armor meant nothing when the enemy was hitting your flank at 30 yards. Richter had adapted. His tactics now emphasized constant movement, never staying static, always buttoning up hatches, maintaining infantry screen 50 meters ahead of armor. But the Canadians adapted faster. They learned to target the infantry screen first with small arms fire, forcing the soldiers to take cover, creating gaps. Then PIAT teams would infiltrate through the gaps, achieve position, wait. "Contact!" his driver shouted. "Muzzle flash, 11 o'clock!" Richter saw it, brief spark from a building's second floor, maybe 60 meters away. His gunner was already traversing the turret, aligning the 75mm main gun. Then Richter saw the second position, ground level, 40 meters to the right of the first flash. 2 positions. he said into the intercom, forcing his voice to remain steady. Classic L ambush. The first one is bait. Driver, reverse. Gunner, traverse right, load high explosive. Loader, the PIAT fired. Richter never heard it, never saw the bomb in flight. He just felt the impact, violent shock transmitting through armor plate, immediate temperature spike as the shaped charge jet penetrated the turret ring, brief flash of white-hot metal. Then his gunner was screaming and smoke was filling the compartment, and the ammunition stored in the turret bustle was cooking off. Training took over. Bail out, everybody out. Richter threw open his hatch, pulled himself through, fell 8 feet to the ground. His crew followed. Gunner badly burned, loader helping the driver who couldn't see through smoke-damaged eyes. They ran. Behind them, their Panzer IV burned. Richter turned once, looked back at the vehicle he'd commanded for 8 months. Total operational loss. The tank hadn't exploded. PIATs rarely caused catastrophic detonations. It had just stopped. The crew compartment was compromised, the gun was offline, and flames were consuming everything flammable. And somewhere in the darkness, the Canadian who'd fired was already relocating to a new position. Richter reached the secondary defensive line, found the Tiger tank he'd counted on for support. Its commander, a young lieutenant who looked barely 20, was sitting on the turret hatch, staring at the burning Panzer IV. "How many is that?" the lieutenant asked. 7. Richter answered. 7 tanks in 5 days, all to those damned PIAT teams. The lieutenant nodded slowly. Division intelligence says they're unreliable. They say we should maintain pressure, that Canadian infantry will break under sustained armored assault. Richter laughed. Bitter, exhausted sound. Division intelligence is in a chateau 20 kilometers from here, studying maps. We're here, in the real war. And in the real war, every hedgerow might hide a Canadian with that spring-loaded monster, and our tanks are burning. August 21st, 1944. Falaise Pocket, Normandy. The Wehrmacht's collapse was complete. What remained of the German 7th Army was trapped in a steadily shrinking pocket, artillery pounding them from 3 sides, Allied aircraft owning the skies. Major Douglas Harper of the Royal Canadian Engineers walked through the debris field that had once been a panzer regiment, his boots crunching on spent shell casings and shattered equipment. 87 destroyed German armoured vehicles in this sector alone. Tigers, Panthers, Panzer IVs, self-propelled guns. Some gutted by airstrikes, some killed by artillery, but 42 showed distinctive damage consistent with PIAT strikes. Close-range penetrations, side and rear armour compromised, crew compartments burned out. The weapon that British ordnance had developed as a stopgap measure, that German intelligence had dismissed as tactically insignificant, had become one of the deadliest anti-tank weapons of the Normandy campaign. Harper was compiling data for his report to Combined Operations Headquarters. The statistics were remarkable. Canadian infantry battalions had landed with 192 PIAT launches on D-Day. Combat losses were high, mechanical failures, enemy fire, abandonment during retreat. But operational teams had achieved combined kill total of 347 German armoured vehicles during the Normandy campaign. Success rate per engagement averaged 58%, lower than anti-tank guns, but achieved at ranges where anti-tank guns couldn't deploy. But numbers didn't capture the psychological dimension. Harper had interviewed German prisoners, reviewed captured tactical documents. What emerged was a picture of German armour doctrine fundamentally disrupted by weapon they hadn't anticipated. Panzer commanders, who'd been trained to dominate through superior range and firepower, found themselves fighting at distances where their advantages meant nothing. Tank crews who'd felt invulnerable behind thick armour learned to fear every hedgerow, every building, every ditch. A captured German tactical assessment from 12th SS Panzer Division, dated June 18th, detailed the problem. Enemy infantry consistently achieves positions within 50 meters before engaging. Traditional standoff tactics ineffective in terrain-restricting visibility. Recommendation: avoid close-quarters combat, maintain open-terrain warfare whenever possible. But in Normandy, avoiding close-quarters combat wasn't an option. Harper knelt beside a destroyed Tiger tank, examined the penetration hole in the side armor. The shaped charge jet had burned through 80 millimeters of steel plate, created entry wound 8 centimeters in diameter, ignited ammunition inside. The crew had bailed out. Scorch marks on the hull showed where burning men had touched metal. 3 of them had made it, 2 hadn't. The PIAT's tactical legacy extended beyond Normandy. By August 1944, British and Canadian tactical doctrine had incorporated lessons learned from hedgerow fighting. Infantry battalions now trained specifically for close-range anti-armor engagement. PIAT teams learned to work in pairs, establishing interlocking fields of fire. Commanders understood that in urban terrain, in forests, in any environment restricting visibility, the PIAT was often more valuable than towed anti-tank guns. The weapon's limitations were well documented. Mechanical reliability remained problematic. Approximately 30% of PIATs experienced malfunctions requiring field maintenance. The cocking mechanism was physically demanding, limiting sustained rate of fire. Maximum effective range meant operators had to close to distances where enemy return fire was lethal. But the advantages had proven decisive. Zero backblast signature meant teams could fire from enclosed positions, buildings, bunkers, trenches, without giving away their location. Silent operation compared to rockets meant multiple shots from same position. Mechanical simplicity meant repairs could be conducted in field with basic tools. Lieutenant Mackenzie had survived Normandy, promoted to captain, his company having fought from the beaches to Falaise. Harper found him at the battalion command post, supervising the inventory of captured German equipment. "People keep asking me about the PIAT," Mackenzie said, leaning against a shot-up German staff car. "Was it the best anti-tank weapon? Hell no. Americans had better range with their bazookas. Germans had better penetration with their Panzerfausts. But I'm alive, because when that Panzer came around the corner in Caen, I had a weapon that I could fire from inside a building without incinerating myself. That's what mattered." Harper made notes. The human dimension of weapons effectiveness, something that couldn't be captured in penetration statistics or engagement range calculations. Mackenzie and thousands like him had taken this ungainly, difficult weapon and made it work because the alternative was death. "What happens now?" Harper asked. "Post-war assessment?" Mackenzie shrugged. "Military procurement is already looking at next generation. Some kind of recoilless rifle, I hear. More range, better accuracy, easier to operate. The PIAT will probably be obsolete in 5 years, but it won't be forgotten." "No," Mackenzie agreed. "Tank crews who survived Normandy? They'll remember. German commanders who had their doctrine shattered? They'll remember. This weapon proves something important. In the right terrain, with the right tactics, infantry can dominate armor. Not despite technological limitations, but sometimes because of them. By the time Allied forces entered Germany in 1945, the PIAT's role was already diminishing. Improved anti-tank weapons were reaching frontline units. The tactical environment was changing. More open terrain, more mobile warfare, less hedgerow fighting. But the lessons remained. In post-war analysis, military historians documented how the PIAT had forced fundamental changes in armored doctrine. German tank tactics in later campaigns showed influence of Normandy experience, increased emphasis on infantry armor coordination, reluctance to operate in restrictive terrain without infantry screen, heightened awareness of close-range threats. Harper completed his report in September 1944. His conclusions emphasized that weapons effectiveness couldn't be measured purely through technical specifications. The PIAT succeeded not because it was superior to alternatives, but because it matched specific tactical requirements of Normandy fighting. In an environment where visibility was restricted, where engagements occurred at close range, where concealment was critical, the weapon's unique characteristics became advantages. The men who carried PIATs into combat rarely spoke about their experience with nostalgia. The weapon was heavy, difficult, dangerous to operate. But when German armor appeared and infantry had nowhere to retreat, the PIAT was the difference between survival and death. 50 years later, military analysts studying anti-armor tactics would return to Normandy campaign, examining how infantry with limited resources had defeated technologically superior German armor. The PIAT became case study in how tactical innovation and adaptation could overcome material disadvantage, how soldiers with determination and training could make ungainly, imperfect weapons devastatingly effective. The weapon that German intelligence dismissed as secondary threat had helped break the Wehrmacht in Normandy. Not through technological superiority, but through something more fundamental. The courage of men willing to close to 50 yards from enemy tanks, knowing that at that range there was no second chance. The PIAT's story reminds us that victory often comes not from perfect weapons, but from imperfect tools wielded with perfect courage. These Canadian soldiers proved that determination matters more than specifications, that tactical innovation defeats technological superiority. If you want to discover more untold stories from World War II, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. What other overlooked weapons or tactics do you think deserve recognition? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.